Welcome. Today we have our webinar. So glad you could join us. If you'd like to support future AMATYC webinars, please consider becoming a member of AMATYC. And we are also thankful for McGraw-Hill Higher Education, who is the proud supporter of the AMATYC webinar series for 2024. Just a couple of reminders. We have our big 50th AMATYC annual conference coming up this year in November in Atlanta. We also have an additional variety of professional development opportunities and publications for members. If you're ready to be the next AMATYC webinar presenter, consider sharing. There's a QR code for both a way to submit your proposal as well as to view previous AMATYC webinars. Just a couple of notes here. The views expressed by the presenters are not necessarily the views of AMATYC. Commercial products mentioned by presenters are not endorsed by AMATYC. Today, here is our presentation. So today we have the observation protocol for active learning, or OPAL, with April Strom and Scott Adamson. So I'm not going to read this. I'm just going to say April is a mathematics professor at Chandler Gilbert Community College. And so I believe is Scott. Yes. So I'll let them say a couple of words before they get started if they choose to. And just a reminder, so I will be asking those in attendance to submit a webinar attendee survey. As always, if you have any questions about webinars or concerns, please email me, and my email address is given. I'll put that link, so don't worry, into the chat towards the end of the presentation. So thank you everyone for joining, and I am going to let them have it. There you go.
All right, cool.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, everyone. All right, so hopefully this all works. Come on, slideshow. Okay, Scott, thumbs up.
Looking good.
Right. Yeah, so yes, welcome everybody to this presentation on OPAL. Scott and I both are super excited to be able to share with you all something that we've been working on for a few years now, huh, Scott?
Been a while.
Been a while.
4 years now?
I think so, something like that. So we have collectively, as part of a NSF-funded project called Teaching for Prowess, have designed this instrument called OPAL, the Observation Protocol for Active Learning. And we're just delighted to be able to share all the ins and outs of OPAL with you today. Scott and I both have many years of experience, probably too many to count, right, Scott? Probably don't want to say the number, but it's a double-digit one.
We can't count that high.
I don't have enough fingers to count that high. We've been teaching for many years, and we're super fortunate to be able to be faculty at Chandler Gilbert Community College, which is part of the Maricopa Community College District in Phoenix, where we have 10 colleges, and we're at one of those amazing colleges. So moving on, just a quick disclaimer, another one. Since this is an NSF-funded project, we just want to say that our opinions and findings and conclusions are our own, not those of the NSF, but thank you to the National Science Foundation for the money, the funding to be able to do this work, but also really for the support of community colleges and the work that we're doing. This Teaching for Prowess project is really housed under AMATYC, and then we have a few partner colleges as part of this. But to the NSF, thank you for just making sure that community colleges were part of the funding structure of these grants. So a little bit about OPAL. Scott, tell us what we're going to learn today.
Oh, we're going to learn all kinds of cool things about OPAL. And here's the first cool thing. Did you know that before it was called OPAL, it was the Active Learning Observation Protocol? ALOP. Well, ALOP, that whole acronym was a flop. So fortunately, we got the letters mixed around and we went with OPAL instead, which is much cooler. And look at the cool graphic we have. So today, you're going to get the origins of OPAL, like you just got a little tidbit of trivia there. We're going to look at the overview of the entire structure of the instrument, which is broken down into themes, 4 of them, traits, 12 of them, numbered 0 through 11, very purposefully, look-fors, what are you looking for in this, for these different traits? And then finally, how might one use OPAL out in the wild? That's our plan for today.
Oh, that's exciting. So yes, once we like morph from, our old acronym, not so fun, to OPAL, we also really thought through this little graphic that's here. This happens to be the OPAL stone. And to us, this has meaning. This has meaning because we know the classroom really is this melding of all kinds of things. And it's really hard to like pick apart just this little piece of instruction and this separate piece of instruction. They really morph into each other, much like this OPAL stone graphic is doing with the colors. So this is in our minds what the classroom sort of looks like. It's this colorful thing that bleeds from one color to the next.
And we probably don't have to tell anybody here, especially nearing the end of a semester, how complex the whole teaching and learning endeavor is. When you put a number of humans into a room or on an online platform, and to expect learning to occur, boy, is it complex. But we're trying to distill it into this instrument here today.
Yes, absolutely. And as Mary mentioned, as you have these burning questions, by the way, please just plop them in the Q&A. We're not able to monitor the chat as much as we would like in this forum, but if you would just put your question in the Q&A, we will have some spots along the way where we'll pause and take a question or two, depending on time, and then move on. You don't have to save them to the very end. So let me spend a quick moment talking about where OPAL came from. So this wasn't something we just designed from our minds or from our experience teaching. It didn't happen out of nowhere. We really started looking at the frameworks and the initiatives that had been going on in math education for a number of years. The things that are up on the screen now are really the primary sources that we draw upon in developing OPAL. I'll start from the top. The first graphic says Seminole. This was another NSF project focused on researching active learning in the university settings. There was something like 20 plus universities as part of that project. And so if you're wondering, are universities doing anything with active learning? Well, they are, in fact. And so Seminole was one of those projects that focused on that. And then we have our Teaching for Prowess project focused on community colleges as well. From there, though, the frameworks that we really leaned heavily on were things from back in 2010. It seems so crazy that it's that long ago, but we had something put forward from the Common Core. Yes, the Common Core had a positive contribution to math ed, and that was the standards for mathematical practice, mostly here with these 8 practices. Then we have from NCTM, we have the 8 mathematics teaching practices that in theory were the things that like an instructor would do in a math class to help support what the students would be doing from this list of the standards for mathematical practice. So on the far left is kind of like the practices that students would do. The next one over, the teaching practices, the things that the teachers do to support the students along the way. And then there's just a plethora of math education research out there that really supports the idea of active learning and getting students' minds onto the math and thinking like a mathematician would be thinking, problem solving and reasoning, developing these habits of mind that really support this work with students. Then we have things like, well, what do we do to orchestrate some of the discussions, getting a very high level amount of discourse in the classroom with students? What kinds of things could we do to support that? And that's where this Smith and Stein 5 practices comes from here as well, just kind of giving us information or framework about how we select students' thinking to highlight, how we sequence that thinking maybe in a class, how we monitor and anticipate the kinds of things that students might do. So 5 practices were certainly part of our work here. And then ultimately, Lilia Dahl's Building Thinking Classrooms, where there's 14 practices on how we can actually develop this thinking classroom idea, which is really, at the end of the day, what we want students to be doing is thinking in the classroom. Right, Scott? Isn't that what we're all about?
That's the main purpose of mathematics, is to help students to learn how to think.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't argue with that at all. So when Scott and I were talking about this, Scott one day said, you know what? We have the standards for mathematical practices. There's 8 of those things. And then we have 8 of these teaching practices. And then we've got all this research in method. And we've got these 4 guiding principles from the Seminole Project and 5 of these things and 14 of these things. Like, how do you deal with 8 plus 8 plus 5 plus 14 plus 4 plus all these things, right? What does an instructor do?
So we just thought we'd add to the pile. No, we didn't just add to the pile. We're bringing the pile together.
Yes, that's right. Instead of just adding 12 more things to the stuff, what we did is we took all of this stuff and really distilled it down to a manageable list of just 12, just 12 things that you need to kind of attend to when you're really looking for active learning in a classroom. So let's get into what OPAL is about. So what we're going to do is we're going to start at a very high level here, as Scott describes, like a 40,000 foot level of OPAL. And then as this webinar goes on, we'll start funneling down to more of the nitty gritty stuff. So I'm going to start with this, what we're calling the OPAL pyramid, if you will.
You're going to get to see how the pyramids were created. How exciting. Well, this pyramid anyway.
Well, this particular one, this modern day pyramid, the OPAL.
That's right.
Yeah. So Scott, tell us a little bit about this first level, layer, theme kind of thing for OPAL.
Yeah, one thing that this didn't happen just out of the blue. This was over our work with this. We realized that what is foundational, what is most important in our jobs as math educators is the mathematics. We wanted to really push and provide an opportunity through this protocol to think about the mathematics. And so in this first theme, which has some traits that we'll unpack as well later, but in this first theme, we really want us, everybody thinking about the mathematics. What is important to be taught and learned? What activities should we see students engaged in the classroom? And in fact, in the instrument, you'll see later on, you'll see where we have a little template for an observer to use, where before the observation even occurs, you would be thinking about, okay, I'm walking into a classroom and they're teaching the optimization in Calculus 1. Okay, before I even see the lesson, what mathematical ways of thinking do I want to, what I ideally see when I walk into that classroom? So focusing on the mathematics, focus on sense making, focus on students' deep thinking about the mathematics starts even before the observation starts.
That's so true. And this idea of, trying to get students to imagine and experience life as a mathematician itself, right? So getting students to think, what do mathematicians do when I get new mathematics and I'm having to make sense of it and problem solve and reason and these kinds of things. I love it. We have the next layer of this pyramid that's being built is really focused here on the actual lesson. How would I design such a lesson that has this powerful mathematical ideas that Scott was talking about, building this conceptual understanding of the mathematics? What might a lesson look like? What types of problems might I bring in, or problem, singular? Maybe it's just one problem, but it's so robust and powerful and thick that it does the work that we need it to do, right? So designing what those lessons really are about is an important piece to this.
And it goes well beyond kind of like when I came into the teaching profession, it was I don't know if anybody was old like me, but it was Madeline Hunter's Essential Elements of Instruction. And so it was kind of like, okay, the teacher first is going to show you how to do some things, and then the students are going to try to do some things, and then they're going to go home and do some things on their own. The old I do, we do, you do model. And that's not what we're talking about at all. As we think about stage one or level one here, the mathematics, what is the important mathematical thinking that we want to have unfold in this lesson that then feeds into effective lesson design and then implementation, which really is what we're getting into next, is the implementation.
Yeah, speaking of, so now we're really thinking, okay, I've got this wonderful mathematical idea or set of ideas that I'm planned out. I've got a lesson to support that. Now let's go do the thing, implement the stuff, right? The active learning in the classroom discourse. This really is another, we believe, layer to this pyramid for OPAL. We're focusing on active learning and getting that discourse to happen. Students using precise mathematical communication in both like written form, but also verbal form when they're talking to each other, right? And critical thinking, justifying their reasoning, all these kinds of things. This is really in our minds where the rubber meets the road for all the planning that's happened before. This is what's occurring in the classroom.
Hey, April, did you know that it's increasing because it's positive, because it was set equal to 0, because it? That's what we're trying to help our students to describe more carefully in this active learning, collaboration, discussion world. Having our students more carefully describe what they're thinking as they implement the mathematical ideas.
Yeah, so true. We often call this speaking meaningfully, right? We want students to speak meaningfully, and we should ourselves speak very meaningful when we're describing the mathematics for the students too. And so avoiding those kind of pronouns that can be, cause more fuzziness for the students. They don't know what the it is that you're referring to, Scott, if you were to say that in class, right? And by the way, your it refers to lots of things, not just one.
That's right.
So can be very confusing for students. Lastly, we have the top of the pyramid here, and this isn't necessarily like the top of the cake to all the stuff, but more like another piece, another layer to this idea of doing active learning in the classroom, and that's attending to the mathematical mindsets and the equity part of things. Scott, fill us in a little bit about your thinking here for this layer.
Yeah, we just view this active environment as an opportunity to have all students engaged. And you're going to hear us later on when we get to that theme 4 and some of the traits, you're going to hear us talk about low floor, high ceiling. So going back to number 2, picking a good task, a design of our lesson so that all students can engage. That's the equity piece with high expectations, but there might be different levels of engagement. We want to challenge the students that need to be challenged to go beyond. We want to support the students who need additional support. And we want to build a community in our classroom where all students are having a positive mathematical experience. And we're avoiding the, well, I'm just not a math person. And we around our school, we have t-shirts, in fact, that say this: how to be a math person. Number 1, be a person. Number 2, do math. Now you're a math person, congratulations. And we think all of our students can be math people in that regard. They can all engage, they all have the ability. Now it might come out differently in that low floor, high ceiling, but we want all students to have the opportunity to showcase and to grow and to learn as they engage in our classrooms.
That's so true. And so this is the big picture, as I mentioned, the 40,000-foot level, if you will, with all the themes. And we were very purposeful, by the way, in the order in which these themes were kind of thought out, particularly with the foundation. Theme number 1, layer 1, being the mathematics. And that's really what supports all the other work that we do in an active learning classroom. So now let's just kind of lower the ceiling a little bit. Instead of 40,000 foot, let's come down to maybe the 10,000 foot. So here I'm going to kind of lay out, Scott and I both will lay out the big themes again, but notice underneath the themes, we have some traits that are here. So now we're getting a little more detailed about what are the kinds of traits that would support this particular theme. So in theme 1, with making sense of the mathematics, again, this is our first layer to this pyramid. We got to be really looking at this habits of mind and nurturing sense making, getting students to grapple with the mathematics in such a way that they're experiencing things before we formalize the things for them. This is very much about having students sort of find the patterns, grapple, make mistakes, put out there what they know and what they can do, so that we as instructors can take it from there. So we use the thinking to help guide instruction throughout. And so really nurturing that is part of this theme here. And then allowing students to make these broader connections among the mathematical ideas that are being supported. We don't want students to be walking away thinking, okay, this little slice is what I learned today. Tomorrow, I'll learn another little slice, and those two don't connect. We want them to be seeing all the connections and this bigger story of mathematics that gets to unfold in their classes. And so, so making connections is a big part. And then ultimately fostering conceptual understanding, getting students to not just be able to do these procedures, but deeply understand what it is they're doing. And in fact, the teaching practices I mentioned a few minutes ago from NCTM's Principles to Actions really emphasizes the idea of focus on conceptual understanding and let the procedures emerge from there. Not rushing to the algorithm, but in fact, letting the procedure emerge, not starting with, here's the formula, here's how to do the thing. Now let's build the concept, which often gets, on the cutting room floor kind of thing. So keeping in mind the conceptual understanding. The next theme, Scott, tell us a little bit about the traits here for theme 2, designing lessons.
Yeah. So again, before the observation, we're thinking about theme 1 and the mathematics, which then leads to designing lessons that promote mathematical thinking. And as we dig into that trait number 3, we'll talk about what does mathematical thinking look like. It's not just that they can do the 7 steps and get the answer. It's more than that. It's connected back to the conceptual understanding, so that what they choose to do is because they've thought about what they're trying to accomplish, and then they do it.
Sorry.
Yeah. So we have to think about that. What kinds of mathematical thinking do we want to promote in that lesson? And then we create cognitively demanding tasks. And so again, this is where we're going to see especially the low floor, high ceiling idea, because let's be honest, in a classroom, it's not that every kid in a classroom is exactly at the same mathematical level. And so we have this idea of low floor, high ceiling, but cognitively demanding for all in that way. And as students engage, it's our job as the instructor to have good questioning, to promote productive struggle, to promote the thinking that we want to engage in. And so before that lesson even happens, are we thinking about the kinds of questions that we might be using to promote all of those things? And then what tools? Tools as in graphs, tables, the algebraic things or symbolic things or technological things, a Desmos or an Excel spreadsheet or a whatever app for whatever class. So how might those be leveraged in a meaningful way to promote the thinking and the all the problem solving that we want to have unfold in this lesson?
Yeah. And then the traits under theme 3, which is this active learning focus trait and classroom discourse, is really trying to just find ways to facilitate the meaningful discourse that would happen in the student collaboration. Encouraging, as I mentioned, this precise communication, avoiding that little it language, as we say, and ultimately supporting student justification and critiquing. We want students to be critiquing the mathematics of others. Well, in order to do that their thinking needs to be made public. And in an active learning environment, that's what needs to happen, is thinking needs to be displayed for all of us, other students, as well as the instructor, to understand where to go from there, right, Scott?
So April, who do you do mathematics for? I always forget.
Oh, well, we do it for human consumption, is what I say.
Oh, not
It's
just for
for human
yourself.
consumption, right? And that's actually a good point. Thank you for bringing this up because often I'm sure there's other people here today that this has happened to them before, where students will say, well, I skipped this step and I skipped this step because I just did it in my head. You know what I'm doing. You know what I'm talking about. You know what I mean from this math, right? And to remind students that, as I tell my students, if the president of the college was walking down the hallway and he decided to peek into our class and look at your mathematics, would he know what is going on in your mind? Did you show enough and justify your reasoning enough that he would know what's happening? And so I think that's an important piece, right? It's for human consumption.
Yep.
All right, Scott, how about the theme 4 traits?
Well, first of all, April, there's a clear problem here.
No?
You got to take trait 6 and move it underneath trait 11 so it's nice and even all the way across.
I know. It didn't
This
balance.
is 3, 4, 3, 2 business. That's the way it worked out, huh? Yeah, there's the equity piece. And we love the wording coming from AMATYC's impact. And so the word prowess, we think, is a great word to capture what we're hoping for. Perseverance. We want students to learn to struggle productively and exhibit perseverance in problem solving. Hey, I don't know about y'all, but we live in a world where solving problems and having that persistence and perseverance is an important trait that we can cultivate in our mathematics classrooms. And again, I'm going to say this last part again, but high expectations for anybody and everybody that's in our classrooms.
That's right. And one thing to notice, you see these codes underneath each of the traits, like ALGP1, 3, SMP1, so forth. These are really our pointers back to those documents and frameworks that we really drew upon in creating this particular trait. So those were kind of helpful for us to recall where we got our inspiration from for these particular traits. All right, so now coming down from the 10,000 foot level, a little closer to ground level, let's just focus now on theme 1, the mathematics. So really exposing the intricacies of trait 0 and theme 1 here, developing mathematical habits of mind for nurturing sense making. Imagine you are walking into a classroom and your focus is that you want to see some active learning. But what is it that you're supposed to look for? Where these 12 traits are the things to look for, but even more specific is, how do you know that trait's really happening in the classroom? What are the things that the teacher might be doing? What are the things that the students might be doing in support of this particular trait, which is under this first theme of making sense of mathematics? So if you were to imagine what that might look like and come up with a list, maybe it looks like the list that we have for you here today.
Voila!
Yes, here's a planned out list.
Hey, April, I just had a great idea.
Okay.
What if the people that are in this webinar today had access to this document and they could have all of this written down for them? That would have been a great idea.
That is an excellent idea, Scott. In fact,
glad I thought of it.
Yeah. So everybody here will not only have access to these slides that we're showing, but you'll actually have access to the full document. Hold to the end. We'll provide the PDF link for you to download the whole thing. There's a lot here to this, right? So no need to worry about snapping images of slides and so forth. We'll give it all out there. So back to this particular trait, like, how do you know, right, that this is happening and what should teachers be doing? I'm going to point to the last bullet under what are teachers doing. This is really, once again, about allowing students to behave and experience life as a mathematician. And so what do mathematicians do? Well, in fact, Scott, do you know what the difference is between a mathematician and a non-mathematician? Well, it turns out mathematicians stay with problems longer. That's what mathematicians, they are persisting. They stay with problems longer. And so that's what we want our students to do, right? Persist through these problems and not be like, I don't get it, I'm out. they need to really stick with it. And so developing those habits is really important part. I love here this list that really comes from Al Cuoco's work on habits of mind. And that is really getting students to do these things. Sniff patterns out, use their noses, follow their noses, as James Tanton often says. He's the MAA mathematician at large. And I just love that. Just allowing students to use their gut to kind of figure out where to go next, their intuition.
Just follow your nose, but then deal with the consequences.
That's very true. You can do whatever you want in math. Like in life, there's just consequences along the way. So let's move on to the next trait. Number one, making connections. So once again, if you were imagining yourself of like, how would I see this happening in a classroom? What would I observe? What would the teacher be doing? What would the students be doing? Once again, making connections, developing the habits of mind, fostering that conceptual understanding, and so forth are the big parts of this particular trait and theme. And so here's a nice bulleted list of things. Scott, what jumps out at you to what the teacher's doing, what the students are doing and making connections?
I'm not always going to jump to the last bullet, but this is only our second one, so it's not a pattern yet if I jump to the last bullet.
Were you sniffing out the pattern? I think
Yes, I was. I saw after one, you go to the last bullet, I go to the last bullet. But the last bullet here, eliciting students' prior knowledge that may come into play when considering a novel problem. So we don't typically pre-teach. We start class with students up at whiteboards, ready to actively engage in something that they may have never considered before. Low floor, high ceiling, but we know coming in, they've got some prior knowledge, and here's a new thing, a new problem, a new idea that they haven't engaged in before, and we leverage what they have in the past to get things started, get that tinkering started, get the trying, following your nose started, and as it gets unveiled around the room, then you might see a pattern over here, and then a graph over here, and a table over here, and then it's our job in the facilitation to connect the ideas and make it well known. So when students leave that classroom, there's no doubt that that was a big thing that you were supposed to learn here today.
Oh, I love it. Yes. All right. The next trait for this, focusing on conceptual understanding, as we've been mentioning a time or two here. Once again, how do you look for this in a particular classroom? What would be those things that the teacher would be doing or the students would be doing? And so we have a list, not going to the last bullet here, going to the first bullet. I'm breaking the pattern. Breaking it. So providing students with opportunities to use their reasoning strategies and methods. And this is also about like displaying what those reasoning strategies are for the class, right? Up at the boards. Now, many people might not know, Scott, are sort of thinking about how the classroom runs. We are totally imagining the entire class or as many students as possible standing at the boards doing math together.
Would these be vertical non-permanent surfaces by any chance?
Oh, they would. In the beginning, the building thinking classrooms framework, they're definitely about vertical non-permanent surfaces. That's totally a thing. And so students are, going through their reasoning and developing this conceptual understanding. And so the teachers are really allowing that to happen. And then the students are doing things that provide flexibility in their strategies and reasoning patterns. And that becomes evident as the instructor is roaming the room and looking at what's happening mathematically. So let's pause. Let's do a quick Q&A. We've got a few, looks like a couple of questions in the Q&A so far. And so let's go with a couple of them. So the question by Rochelle is, what do the numbers under your traits mean? I think we answered that one with the codes to the stuff.
Can you go back to one slide though? Just I'll highlight them really quick so that people know.
Hold on. There we go.
So ALGP, Active Learning Guiding Principles from Seminole. MTP are the mathematics teaching practices from NCTM. SMP are the standards for mathematical practices from the Common Core, BTC, Building Thinking Classrooms.
Yes, absolutely. So Teresa also had that same question as well. So I'm glad we paused to make sure we address that. What's also interesting is I just mentioned a few minutes ago that we would give you the whole PDF for OPAL. And in there, we have a bunch of narrative that describes about the history of this and how this kind of came about. And we also delineate exactly what those codes are about too. So hopefully that helps along the way.
Cool.
All right, so just time-wise, moving along, we've got the second layer of designing lessons now of this particular pyramid. So the next trade up, well, designing lessons for getting mathematical thinking to be out there. So in this particular trait, what are teachers doing? What are students doing? Well, first of all, the teachers really need to be establishing clear goals that articulate the mathematics for students. And so this is not like, oh, let me just open my book today. Let's turn to section 3.2. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. And then, oh, that's the goal for today. We're going to be doing quadratic functions or whatever the topic is. But in fact, the instructor, if they've really thought about the mathematical ideas and that they want to have unfold, they should have also established some clear goals to make that thinking to happen and get out there.
But then,
Oh yeah, Scott, go for it.
no, you go first.
No, you.
Rock, paper, scissors. All right, in the moment decisions. I wanted to highlight that because we do some planning. I mean, we have expectations of planning, anticipating what students might do, but I just want to be honest that there's many times you get into the classroom and the thing is happening and this happened and this happened, and you have to, in the moment, make a decision to pursue that or connect that or do that. And the lesson kind of goes off different than what maybe you had in mind going in. And that might, as I say that, you might go, oh, that sounds a little scary or uncomfortable or whatever. I want to say that's what I love about my job. I mean, I've been doing it long enough where I don't get surprised that often, but once in a while I get a little surprised. And that's what brings joy to my job, is that I don't know exactly how it's going to play out with that group of kids in a classroom. And so those in the moment decisions make the teaching and learning so much fun.
It certainly does. I love it. It's a nice jolt of energy again with our jobs. Moving on to trait 4, the creating cognitively demanding tasks that promote this reasoning and ultimately problem solving. And here are a few things under each of what teachers might be doing to support that and what students might be doing as well. Again, the whole goal to this, just to kind of stop and reframe, is we needed things to be looking for to make sure that this trait was happening in this classroom. Now we're only on trait 4 of theme 2. There's 12 traits total. We can imagine, even in the bestest of active learning environments, you're not going to see all 12 traits happen. And that's not the goal. The goal is not to get all 12 to occur. Well, I mean, maybe it is ultimately in a perfect world, but the reality is you're going to see a bunch of them happening and maybe some not. And we'll get to a little bit about what that might tell us a little later. Moving on to the next trait, leveraging productive questioning strategies. Hey, Scott, maybe tell us a little bit about this questioning stuff.
Yeah, we want to be prepared a little bit. I mean, I know we're making in the moment by moment choices about how things are going to unfold because of what we see happening in that classroom. But on the other hand, we also want to be prepared with some questions so that when the thinking gets stalled, how do we push thinking rather than just, tell them the answer? I mean, so it's so easy. We care so much that sometimes we want to rescue the student out of the problem, and we'll tell them or show them and move them on. And we want to be careful to not steal the joy of the discovery from the students. So we have to maybe ask just the right question at the right time to produce additional thinking. And so that's part of that active learning environment, is asking good questions to continue student thinking.
That's right. I mean, that's really the goal, right? Is to not be answering those questions that stop that thinking, but instead keep it going for as long as you possibly can.
One of my favorite things about that, like it's sometimes you think, well, how do I do that? Well, sometimes all you have to do, student will say, can you help me? Like right here. And all I would say is something like, well, what are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
Well, and they start talking and they talk themselves into what to do and they go, thanks so much. And I'm like, I didn't do anything. All I did was say, what are you trying to accomplish? And that got them thinking about what they're trying to accomplish, and it led them to make some progress on the problem. So it's not, or you just ask why. What were you
Yeah.
thinking? Why did you do that? What does this mean? And that just fuels additional thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And the next trait we have is the mathematical tools and using those strategically. Scott mentioned about maybe using technology, Desmos, don't be afraid to use, certainly graphing calculators, yes, Excel, like all the things to help support students. The teachers really should be leveraging those things, but you know what? Whiteboards are also tools. Using those vertical non-permanent surfaces, AKA whiteboards or the window or you name it, to try to display the thinking, getting that out there is certainly important. Moving on to, we've got one question here, by the way, one additional question. So let's pause and answer that in this Q&A blip. The question is about live streaming and online courses. What advice will we have about doing active learning and getting the thinking out there for that? Scott, do you want to tackle that one?
I think it's really hard, to be honest,
And
especially in like in a asynchronous online environment. It's really hard. But I will just point you to one area. There's a few, but there's one area. Things like the Desmos activity realm will get. It's, if you haven't been there, go search Desmos activity. Not Desmos the graphing calculator, but Desmos the activity builder. That could be a way to get students active. If you're live online, as we call it here, if you're live online, breakout rooms but with high expectations that when they return from the breakout room, there's going to be some sharing, not just nothing. We have to have a high expectations for producing something when they come out.
yeah.
But I'm the last couple of years now, I guess, fully in person, and I've chosen to avoid that online world because I think the active learning that we're talking about here with OPAL is more readily done in a face-to-face classroom experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the reality is some of these things, many of these things, perhaps all of these things, I don't know, are things that really have to be just done when you're together live with people in the room. It's just such a challenge otherwise. So that is certainly our perspective, is that we do have some time, and it could even be a hybrid type of course. It doesn't have to be fully in person. I teach several hybrid courses where instead of seeing my students 2 days a week, I see them 1 day a week. Even in that 1 day, we're doing these things as much as we possibly can. So that's that. We'll move on. So the next layer is theme 3 with the active learning and classroom discourse. So the next trait in our line is facilitating meaningful mathematical discourse and getting that student collaboration to be out there. So if you were to observe this particular trait, what would you see? Hopefully, the teachers doing and the students doing. So here are some of the possibilities. Again, there's a lot here. You can get the full document later, but to highlight a few things, such as like, I'll do the second bullet under what are teachers doing, selecting and sequencing student approaches. I'm going to just hover for a minute and say that's super critical to get this collaboration going, because while we do spend a lot of effort to get the students grouped and at the boards and doing math and working together, it's also about what you do after that. What do you do with the mathematics that's now displayed at the board? How do you sequence what you're going to highlight and not highlight? How do you get students to offer up their thinking? And especially when you see some incorrect mathematics. And we highlight those things in class. And I've got some people who often say, how do you highlight students' incorrect thinking in class? Won't you really, embarrass them or turn them away? the way it's done and handled is a very delicate thing, but certainly important to highlight. I often go to my students and say, you know what, you've given me a little teacher gift in this moment. Do you think that I can highlight this little piece here? Because we can all learn from that. I ask for permission before I highlight it for the whole class, and that always helps. So, so selecting and sequencing those bits of thinking are important.
And April, we just have to say that third bullet too. I think it's so important. Positioning students as authors of ideas. I love that phrase, that they feel like they're creating, they're thinking, they're putting it out there for that purpose. We get to build a trust in the classroom where they know they're putting it out there for others to see and possibly critique and correct, but all in a positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good one. They take ownership of their work when they are positioned as authors of their ideas. So trait 8, encouraging precise communication. We talked about this a bit of like, avoiding the pronouns when we're describing the mathematics and speaking meaningfully for the students as well. So these are the kind of things that come up when what we're hoping the teachers are doing and trying to see what the students are doing, that they're actually communicating together. But again, it's not just communicating verbally and not just written, it's both. So both of those are really important to focus on. The last one here, trait 9, supporting student justification and critiquing. Scott, tell us a little bit about how this should and could play out in the classroom.
Yeah, I want to just highlight in this moment, critiquing, from my classroom anyway, takes on 3 forms. Critiquing might be when a student is sharing or you're observing others' work. It might just be, what do you observe? Just tell me what you saw, what jumped out at you. It might be asking a question. I didn't understand what you did there. Why did you do it that way? Or it might be more of the conventional, I think you have an error there. And I try to promote a classroom where pointing out errors is the most loving thing to do. If somebody has something wrong, we want to discuss it in a very professional, polite, respectful way. So critiquing for me are those 3 things that I try to hold my students' feet to the fire to engage in those 3 things.
Yeah, absolutely. Mistakes are happy accidents, Scott.
Yep.
Just so you know.
Yep.
All right, let's pause for a quick Q&A. There's one more question in the Q&A by Beth. What levels of math classes do you use this approach for?
April,
Scott?
can I share?
Yeah.
So in the last year, because of some other work that we do, I've been in kindergarten, and then of course my own classroom. I've been in kindergarten through college classrooms where active learning has been going on. And I've seen, I mean, you have to adapt to kindergarten first, second, let's say, and a little different to third, fourth, fifth, and a little different in middle school. But I have seen these ideas that we're talking about here today happening at all levels, K through college. For us, I teach all levels here. So I would do this in developmental. I would do this in intermediate algebra. I would do this in my Calc 3 DiffEq classes and do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the plan. At some point, it becomes one of these things of like, I don't know how to teach any other way. It really doesn't matter the level. It's just, this is the style of teaching that we really aspire to. And then lastly, we've got our 4th layer of the mathematical mindsets and equity. We have a couple of traits here to showcase the cultivating student perseverance and prowess. Again, we've got a list of what are teachers doing, what are students doing in support of this particular trait. Anticipating one of the teacher things to be doing, anticipating what students might struggle with during a lesson, and then being prepared to support that is a big part of this when we're back to, remember how I said the opal has got these colors and things are melded together and blended. That's the classroom, right, that we're teaching in. And so as we imagine the mathematics happening here, to start this process, we also have to anticipate where students might struggle and maybe even purposefully build that in to perturb their thinking in such a way that we're waiting for it to happen. We're not going to tell the students, oh, by the way, you're going to struggle on step 4 or problem 2, but we know it. We know it's going to happen. And then we start seeing it happen. And it becomes that magical moment when you're teaching to stop the class and hover and talk about that thing. And so anticipation of those student struggles is a big part of this too. Lastly, trait 11, maintaining equitable high expectations for all. Scott, you want to say a word about this one?
Yeah. I'm going to jump back at that right in the middle, making in the moment decisions. So as we imagine all students, high expectations, but not necessarily all at the same level. I have a student this semester, his name's Grant. Grant is a very special, talented mathematical thinker. And so my challenge every day is, how do I push Grant to go above and beyond through what's happening in the classroom, through the assignments, through whatever. I don't want him to feel like this class was so easy. But then on the other hand, you have other students that need a little additional support. And so in the moment decisions about how do I create an environment where all students are being adequately challenged and supported and encouraged through it all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the idea of keeping high expectations for all, we still realize students struggle. And just because students are struggling in one area doesn't mean they're going to struggle in all the pieces of that particular class. Everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. But at the end of the day, we're really trying to avoid this sort of deficit perspective of teaching where we think, oh, I'm teaching, fill in the blank. All students are going to struggle on this, so I'm going to water down the stuff. That's not the approach that's here. The approach is to say, we believe all students, and really mean it, by the way, that all students can learn this mathematics, and we're going to keep those expectations high, but we're going to build these opportunities that are meaningful for all students to really engage in the math. And that's really critical, especially when you're selecting and perhaps picking and certainly developing your problems that have this low floor and high ceiling idea so that all students have an opportunity to engage in them. So those are 12 traits of OPAL, and we did the 40,000 foot, the 10,000 foot, and ground level approach. We have a couple of things to mention here about, well, how can I use OPAL? Here's our big vision about how you can use OPAL. For starters, actually, we kind of started on this journey thinking, let's design an instrument for active learning for research purposes. Both Scott and I are trained as qualitative researchers in math education. And so we wanted to have something that we could use for, I don't know, research and project evaluation purposes. And then from there sort of came a, you know what, it could be really a powerful tool for professional development. And so what we are imagining is, you don't necessarily have to go through and put a quantitative number to a particular trait, but rather you might, maybe you're a department chair, maybe you're a coordinator, a lead of some sort, or you're just interested in knowing that you're seeing active learning when you think you're seeing it. You can go in and have these traits and identify just qualitatively about what you're seeing and how you're seeing it. What are the students doing? What are the teachers doing? Making notes of that. Maybe your department chooses to use something like this as a professional development tool so that you are furthering your implementation of active learning. And you might not have thought, oh, maybe I'm supposed to use, I don't know, precise communication. Maybe that was a piece of the puzzle that may have been missing in the teaching of the department. So maybe that's brought in. And so it just exposes some of the things that you're doing very well on in the active learning environment, and maybe some of the things that you would like to attend to. And you use some time to shed light and you know, talk more about the faculty on those particular pieces.
Hey,
So I
April,
mentioned,
can I
oh,
just
yeah.
jump back really quick?
Yeah.
So in the chat, I see exactly what we're talking about. OPAL, if we think of it as like a lens, a professional development lens, this is at least our best attempt at this moment to capture what active learning looks like. This look for idea. What are students doing? What are teachers doing? What are the traits? All the things we've been talking about here today. So I see that, and then I have questions like, how do I support struggling students? How do I support high-performing students? Yes. Now that's a conversation that we need to have. Or I love this, I see it, but how do I do it in my high flex situation? That's a challenge. Yes, it's a challenge. So I see OPAL just right now kind of happening the way we want it to happen professionally, is to give us that lens to see how do we engage in our craft as professional educators to the best that we can. So
Yeah,
conversation and professional development is one of the uses for this.
yeah, that's a perfect way of thinking about it is really it's our lens. And it could be a personal lens. Maybe one just takes it on as their own personal lens to look at their instruction and make changes and enhance. Maybe the department takes it on as more of a broader PD type of tool. We do have a full user's guide, as I mentioned, that everybody will get access to the PDF and you could download. In this document, it's again developed by the Teaching for Prowess project, where Scott and I led, but other people contributed. And we have spelled out, so there's several pages of a narrative that might be of interest to you. But later in the document, you'll see the same information that we passed here to you today, which is the traits and so forth.
With the scoring rubric as well, if it was used in a research.
Yeah.
And a research purpose.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So we had paused for a little Q&A. I don't see more questions queued up. So we have about 3 minutes or so for any questions if anybody wants to plop in another question. But for the time being, I will splash up this particular page, which gives a QR code and a URL. And in the chat, I'll put the actual URL as well, give you all the ways to access this. Just a heads up, this is how you can download the OPAL document, the one I was just displaying, the narrative, all the pieces for the framework. We will ask for a little bit of contact information because Scott and I are very curious of like, who might be interested in using this thing. And so once you submit your contact information, you'll be taken to a thank you for submitting your contact information page. And there will be a link right there that you can download the PDF for OPAL. All right, so I don't see any other questions. Scott, any other last minute things you have to contribute from your end?
No, I'm excited that we had a good number of people interested in active learning and interested in a protocol for observing active learning. And I hope that you can see a vision perhaps for whatever your world is, a vision for research or a vision for just professional development. Either personally, you could professionally develop with your own self, or you could get just informally get a coworker, a colleague down the hall, and kind of look through this lens of OPAL, as you see there on this image. Look through this lens of OPAL and examine and reflect on your own teaching practice.
We do have one question if y'all see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this person says, does OPAL allow for other programs such as Pearson's Learning Catalytics? I don't have an answer to that. I don't really know what you mean by that question, just saying.
I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know Pearson's Learning Catalytics.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No worries. Thank
Yeah.
y'all. So
Yeah.
we are going to stop the recording first. So thank you to everyone. I see everybody saying thank you on the chat. So again, stop.
Yeah, this was fun.